The autumn leaves of 1998 painted Millfield, Ohio, in brilliant shades of amber and crimson. This small town, nestled in the rolling hills of Athens County, was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors and Friday night football games drew half the population. It was here that 16-year-old Sarah Michelle Hartwell lived what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary teenage life, until one October evening when she simply vanished without a trace. Sarah was a junior at Millfield High School, known for her infectious laugh and her dream of becoming a veterinarian. She had shoulder-length auburn hair that caught the light when she smiled, and green eyes that sparkled with mischief during her frequent pranks on her younger brother, Danny. The Hartwell family lived in a modest two-story colonial house on Maple Street, complete with white picket fence and a golden retriever named Buster. Her father, Robert Hartwell, worked as a supervisor at the local paper mill, while her mother, Linda, taught third grade at the elementary school where both Sarah and Danny had once been students. On the surface, Sarah seemed like any other small-town teenager navigating the complexities of high school social dynamics. She was dating Kevin Morrison, the quarterback of the football team, and spent her weekends working part-time at Miller's hardware store on Main Street. Her best friend, Jessica Patterson, lived just 3 houses down, and the two girls were inseparable, sharing secrets, dreams, and an obsession with the latest episodes of Dawson's Creek. But beneath this idyllic exterior, subtle changes had begun to emerge in Sarah's behavior during the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Linda noticed her daughter had become increasingly withdrawn, spending more time alone in her room and less time chatting on the kitchen phone with Jessica. When asked about it, Sarah would simply shrug and claim she was tired from schoolwork and her job at the hardware store. Kevin later told investigators that Sarah had seemed distracted during their last few dates, often staring off into the distance with a worried expression. When he pressed her about what was bothering her, she would force a smile and change the subject. Even Jessica noticed the change, mentioning to police that Sarah had started asking strange questions about bus schedules to Columbus and whether Jessica thought it was possible to start over somewhere completely new. The evening of October 15th started like any other Thursday in the Hartwell household. Sarah came home from her shift at Miller's hardware store around 7:30, her hands still smelling faintly of paint thinner from helping customers in the paint department. She kissed her mother on the cheek, grabbed a ham sandwich from the refrigerator, and headed upstairs to work on her American history report about the Great Depression. Linda remembered hearing Sarah's music playing softly from her room around 9 o'clock when she went upstairs to check on Danny's homework. She knocked on Sarah's door to remind her about an early dentist appointment the next morning, but Sarah called out that she was concentrating and would talk to her later. Those would be the last words Linda Hartwell would ever hear from her daughter. Robert arrived home from his evening shift at the paper mill just before midnight, parking his weathered Ford pickup truck in the driveway, and noting that all the lights were off except for the porch light Linda always left on for him. He assumed everyone was asleep and quietly made his way to bed, careful not to wake his family. The next morning, Linda knocked on Sarah's bedroom door at 6:30 to wake her for the dentist appointment. When there was no response, she gently pushed the door open, expecting to find her daughter still sleeping. Instead, she discovered an empty bed that hadn't been slept in, with the window wide open and the screen removed. Sarah's backpack was gone, along with some clothes from her dresser, but her purse and wallet remained on the nightstand, containing $43 in cash and her driver's license. The immediate panic that gripped the Hartwell family was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Linda's screams brought Robert running from the kitchen, coffee mug still in hand, and together they searched every inch of the house, calling Sarah's name with increasing desperation. Danny, then only 12 years old, emerged from his room confused and frightened by the commotion, asking repeatedly where his sister had gone. Robert immediately called the Millfield Police Department, reaching Officer Tom Bradley, who had known the family for years and had once coached Danny's little leg team. Bradley arrived within 15 minutes, his patrol car's presence in the Hartwell driveway already drawing curious stares from neighbors who were beginning their morning routines. The initial investigation revealed few concrete clues. The removed window screen suggested Sarah had climbed out voluntarily, but the question remained why she would leave behind her money and identification. Officer Bradley called in Detective Maria Santos from the Athens County Sheriff's Department, a seasoned investigator who specialized in missing persons cases. Detective Santos immediately noticed several peculiar details that didn't fit the typical runaway profile. Sarah's favorite necklace, a silver heart pendant that Kevin had given her for her birthday, was still hanging on her jewelry box. Her diary, which Linda confirmed Sarah wrote in religiously, was missing entirely. Most puzzling of all, Sarah's beloved cat, Whiskers, was found locked in the basement, something Sarah would never have done since the cat always slept on her bed. The search efforts began immediately, with volunteers from across Athens County joining local law enforcement to comb through the dense forests and rolling farmlands surrounding Millfield. The autumn weather worked against them, with early morning fog reducing visibility and the recent rains making the wooded areas muddy and difficult to navigate. Bloodhounds were brought in from Columbus, but they lost Sarah's scent at the edge of the Hartwell property, near the old railroad tracks that ran behind their house. Jessica Patterson became a key witness in the early stages of the investigation. She revealed to Detective Santos that Sarah had been receiving anonymous letters for several weeks before her disappearance. The letters, which Sarah had shown to Jessica in confidence, contained vague threats and suggestions that someone was watching her. Sarah had been frightened but refused to tell her parents or contact the police, believing the letters were probably just a cruel prank from someone at school. Unfortunately, Sarah had apparently destroyed these letters, and despite extensive searches of her bedroom and locker at school, investigators never found any trace of them. Jessica could only remember fragments of what they said, mentioning something about Sarah needing to pay for what she had done, and warnings about keeping secrets that weren't hers to keep. Kevin Morrison provided investigators with another crucial piece of information. During their last conversation, 2 days before Sarah disappeared, she had asked him about his older brother Marcus, who had moved to Cleveland after graduating from high school 3 years earlier. Specifically, Sarah wanted to know if Marcus had ever mentioned anything about people from Millfield visiting him in the city. When Kevin asked why she was curious, Sarah had become evasive and changed the subject. Detective Santos interviewed Marcus Morrison by phone, but he claimed to have no knowledge of Sarah or any recent visitors from his hometown. However, his responses seemed rehearsed, and Santos made a note to follow up with an in-person interview if other leads didn't materialize. As the investigation progressed, a troubling picture began to emerge of Sarah's final weeks. Her supervisor at Miller's hardware store, elderly Pete Miller, mentioned that Sarah had seemed increasingly nervous during her shifts. She had started asking to work in the back storage room rather than at the customer counter, claiming she didn't feel comfortable dealing with people. Pete had attributed this to typical teenage moodiness, but now wondered if something more sinister had been troubling her. The case took an unexpected turn when investigators discovered that Sarah had withdrawn $200 from her savings account 3 days before her disappearance. The bank teller remembered the transaction because Sarah had seemed agitated and kept looking over her shoulder as if she was being watched. When asked what she needed the money for, Sarah had claimed it was for Christmas shopping, which struck the teller as odd given that it was still mid-October. This revelation prompted Detective Santos to examine Sarah's movements more carefully in the days leading up to her disappearance. Security footage from the bank showed Sarah entering alone, but revealed a figure in a baseball cap and dark jacket lingering near the entrance. The image was too grainy to identify the person, but it suggested that Sarah might indeed have been under surveillance. The Hartwell family struggled to cope with the mounting uncertainty. Linda took an indefinite leave of absence from her teaching job, unable to concentrate on anything except finding her daughter. She spent her days calling hospitals, homeless shelters, and runaway hotlines across Ohio and neighboring states. Robert continued working at the paper mill, claiming the routine helped him stay sane, but his coworkers noticed he had become withdrawn and increasingly irritable. Danny, caught between childhood and adolescence, handled the crisis by retreating into his room for hours at a time, emerging only for meals and school. He refused to talk about Sarah with anyone, including the child psychologist his parents had arranged for him to see. The family's golden retriever, Buster, seemed to sense something was wrong and would spend hours lying by Sarah's bedroom door, occasionally whimpering as if waiting for her return. As October turned to November, the investigation began to lose momentum. Detective Santos had followed every lead, interviewed dozens of people, and coordinated searches across 3 counties, but Sarah remained missing. The case was featured on local news broadcasts and in the Athens Messenger newspaper, but no credible tips emerged from the publicity. The Hartwell family held onto hope through Thanksgiving and Christmas, setting a place for Sarah at the dinner table and wrapping presents that would never be opened. Linda convinced herself that Sarah would call on Christmas morning, but the phone remained silent. By New Year's Day 1999, even the most optimistic family friends were beginning to whisper about the possibility that Sarah might never come home. Detective Santos was transferred to another case in the spring of 1999, though she continued to check in with the Hartwell family periodically. The official investigation was never formally closed, but with no new evidence or witnesses coming forward, it essentially went dormant. Sarah's case file gathered dust in the Athens County Sheriff's Department, just another unsolved missing person case in a system overwhelmed by similar tragedies. Years passed slowly for the Hartwell family. Linda eventually returned to teaching, though she never fully recovered from the loss of her daughter. She would occasionally receive calls from other parents of missing children, seeking advice or simply someone who understood their pain. Robert developed a drinking problem that he managed to keep functional, never missing work, but consuming increasingly large quantities of beer each evening while sitting in Sarah's room. Danny grew up carrying the weight of his sister's absence. He excelled in school, perhaps driven by a need to honor Sarah's memory, and went on to attend Ohio University in nearby Athens. He majored in criminal justice, telling his parents he wanted to help other families find their missing loved ones. The truth, which he kept to himself, was that he had never stopped believing he might someday solve the mystery of what happened to his sister. In 2005, 7 years after Sarah's disappearance, Robert Hartwell suffered a heart attack while working his shift at the paper mill. He survived but was forced to take early retirement, leaving him with too much time to dwell on his daughter's fate. Linda suggested they move to a smaller house, but Robert refused to leave Maple Street, convinced that Sarah might still come home someday and need to find them. Danny graduated from college in 2006 and was hired by the Athens County Sheriff's Department as a deputy. His fellow officers knew about his personal connection to unsolved cases, and they were supportive of his determination to keep looking for answers. Detective Santos, now retired, would occasionally meet with Danny to discuss Sarah's case, sharing details that hadn't been released to the public and brainstorming new angles to pursue. The breakthrough that the Hartwell family had been hoping for came in the most unexpected way, during what should have been a routine home maintenance project. In March of 2010, nearly 12 years after Sarah's disappearance, Robert decided to finally address a persistent leak in the attic that had been causing water damage to the ceiling in Danny's old bedroom. Danny, now 24 and living in his own apartment in Athens, came home to help his father with the repair work. They spent Saturday morning moving boxes and old furniture to access the area where the leak was originating. As they shifted a heavy trunk that had belonged to Robert's father, Danny noticed something wedged between two roof joists that didn't belong there. It was a plastic shopping bag, carefully sealed and hidden in a space that would have been invisible unless someone was specifically looking for it. Inside the bag was Sarah's missing diary, along with photocopies of what appeared to be financial documents and a letter in Sarah's handwriting addressed to her family. Danny's hands trembled as he called his parents to the attic and carefully opened the letter. The contents of Sarah's final message shattered everything the family thought they knew about her disappearance. In her neat, careful handwriting, Sarah explained that she had discovered her supervisor at Miller's hardware store was embezzling money from elderly customers who paid their bills in cash. Pete Miller had been skimming payments and falsifying receipts for months, targeting customers he knew lived alone and were unlikely to keep careful track of their account balances. Sarah had stumbled across the scheme accidentally when she noticed discrepancies in the cash drawer during one of her shifts. When she tried to discreetly investigate further, Pete Miller realized what she had discovered and began threatening her. The anonymous letters that Jessica remembered were actually from Miller, warning Sarah to keep quiet about what she had seen or face serious consequences. The diary entries revealed Sarah's growing fear and desperation in the weeks before her disappearance. She had tried to gather evidence of Miller's crimes, hoping to turn the information over to the police, but Miller had caught her photographing documents in his office. He had threatened not only Sarah, but also her entire family, claiming he had connections who could make them all disappear if she didn't stay silent. In her final diary entry, dated the day before her disappearance, Sarah wrote that Miller had given her an ultimatum: leave town immediately and never return, or watch her family suffer the consequences. She had decided to run away to protect her parents and Danny, believing that her sacrifice would keep them safe. The $200 she had withdrawn from her savings account was meant to help her survive until she could find work somewhere far from Millfield. The photocopied documents Sarah had hidden with her diary provided detailed evidence of Miller's embezzlement scheme, including the names of victims and the amount stolen from each one. It was clear that Sarah had been methodically building a case against Miller, even as she planned her own disappearance to protect her family. Danny immediately contacted Detective Santos, who came out of retirement to personally oversee the investigation of these new revelations. Pete Miller, now 78 years old, was arrested at his home within hours of the diary's discovery. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he confessed not only to the embezzlement but also to his role in Sarah's disappearance. Miller's confession revealed the tragic final chapter of Sarah's story. She had indeed climbed out of her bedroom window that October night, planning to catch the early morning bus to Columbus and then travel further west. However, Miller had been watching the Hartwell house, suspicious that Sarah might try to leave evidence behind or contact the authorities before disappearing. He intercepted Sarah at the abandoned grain elevator near the railroad tracks, where she was waiting for dawn so she could walk to the bus station without being seen. Miller claimed he only intended to ensure she was actually leaving town, but Sarah threatened to expose his crimes regardless of where she went. In a moment of panic and rage, he struck her with a tire iron he kept in his truck. Miller confessed to burying Sarah's body in a remote section of Wayne National Forest, about 30 miles southeast of Millfield. He had chosen the location because it was far from any hiking trails and unlikely to be disturbed. For 12 years, he had carried the secret of what he had done, watching the Hartwell family suffer while continuing to steal from his elderly customers. The recovery of Sarah's remains brought the family a mixture of relief and renewed grief. After more than a decade of not knowing, they finally had answers, but those answers confirmed their worst fears. Sarah had died trying to protect them, a 16-year-old girl who had faced an impossible choice and chosen to sacrifice herself for her family's safety. Pete Miller was charged with murder in the second degree, embezzlement, and multiple counts of theft from elderly victims. Despite his advanced age, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge noted during sentencing that Miller's crimes had destroyed not only Sarah's life, but also the lives of everyone who loved her. The Hartwell family finally held a funeral for Sarah in the spring of 2010, laying her to rest in Millfield Cemetery under a simple granite headstone that read, Sarah Michelle Hartwell, beloved daughter and sister, 1982-1998. The entire town attended the service, many people remembering Sarah as the bright, caring teenager who had been taken from them far too soon. Danny kept his promise to Sarah's memory by continuing to work in law enforcement, eventually becoming a detective himself and specializing in cases involving missing persons. He established a foundation in Sarah's name that provides support to families dealing with missing loved ones and funds training for law enforcement officers who investigate these cases. Linda Hartwell found peace in knowing that her daughter had died as she had lived, thinking of others before herself. Though the pain of losing Sarah never fully disappeared, Linda was able to return to teaching with renewed purpose, often telling her students about the importance of speaking up when they witness wrongdoing, even when it's difficult or frightening. The case of Sarah Hartwell's disappearance became a cautionary tale about the vulnerability of young people who witness crimes and the importance of having systems in place to protect those who come forward with information. It also highlighted the devastating impact that one person's greed and violence can have on an entire community. Robert Hartwell lived only 3 more years after learning the truth about his daughter's fate. The knowledge that Sarah had died trying to protect her family brought him both comfort and unbearable guilt. He passed away in his sleep in 2013, and many believed he had finally found peace knowing he would be reunited with his daughter. The Miller hardware store closed permanently after Pete Miller's arrest, the building eventually becoming a small cafe that serves the Millfield community. The new owners placed a small memorial plaque near the entrance, honoring Sarah's memory and the courage she showed in her final weeks of life. Detective Santos often spoke about Sarah's case at law enforcement conferences, using it as an example of how important it is to take seriously any reports of anonymous threats or unusual behavior changes in potential victims. She emphasized that Sarah's story might have ended differently if there had been better protocols in place for protecting witnesses to financial crimes. Danny Hartwell eventually moved back to the family home on Maple Street, unable to bear the thought of selling the house where Sarah had grown up. He married his college girlfriend in 2015, and they are raising their children with stories about their brave Aunt Sarah, ensuring that her memory and her sacrifice will never be forgotten by future generations of the Hartwell family. Today, Sarah's bedroom remains largely unchanged, a shrine to the teenager who gave her life to protect the family she loved. Her story serves as a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes or receive recognition for their sacrifices, and that sometimes the most courageous acts happen in the darkness, witnessed only by those who refuse to forget the truth.